let's begin. Hello everyone and welcome back to our January lecture series. My name is Maddie Pride and I'm so excited to be here today with you guys to be leading your session here for QCE English 3 and 4. Now, when I was at high school, English was one of my absolute favorite subjects, and so it is such a pleasure to be offering you guys a bit of a head start into what senior English is going to look like over the next 12 months. We have a big session today, we have a jam-packed session today, and I'm sure some of you will have some questions about senior English, about how to approach senior English well, some study questions perhaps, or some questions on how to best approach different assignments and exams and texts. So if you would like to ask any of those questions throughout the session, there's going to be a live Q&A chat down below, and there is going to be someone there from ATAR Notes to be moderating that chat and answering any questions you might have. So we'd love to encourage you guys to be using that chat all throughout our session today. There is no such thing as a silly question, and I hope that some of you will be able to perhaps help out your peers by answering some questions yourselves or perhaps offering your own advice as well. It's a great opportunity to get a little taste of the ATAR Notes community and get an idea of what your peers are excited for, or perhaps some challenges that they feel like they might be facing as well, and perhaps give you guys an opportunity to help each other out as well. So as I mentioned, today is going to be quite a big session, but before we get into that, I would like to take a moment to introduce ATAR Notes. Now, if you are joining us here at ATAR Notes for the very first time, I would like to say a particularly special welcome to you. We're super stoked that you're here, that you've chosen to join us today. Now, ATAR Notes is an education company that's passionate about helping students achieve their academic goals. And we've been doing that for quite some time now, which has allowed us to build up quite the database of amazing, high quality, free resources for students of all ages and stages to enjoy. So that includes study notes, articles, videos, newsletters, discussions, lectures like this one, even an ATAR calculator. If any or all of those sound interesting to you, or you think some of those resources might be helpful in your study, then we'd love to see you over at atarnotes.com/register. That's atarnotes.com/register, and we hope to see you there. But if that's not enough, if that only scratches the surface, if there is more you would like to explore, then we'd also love to introduce you to ATAR Notes Plus, which is a paid study resource database with literally thousands of high quality study resources for all different subjects, for different years, for Queensland as well as some other states as well. Now these resources include study guides, they include text guides, they include flashcards, they include practice exams and worksheets. There is so much there to use, so much to enjoy, so we highly recommend you checking that out. Again, atarnotes.com, and you'll be able to register for ATAR Notes Plus from there. I cannot recommend some of those resources enough, so make sure you check it out if you are keen. All right, enough of that. Let's get into the reason why you guys are here today, which is English 3 and 4. Now, as I mentioned before, there's quite a bit for us to get through today, and so I wanted to walk us through a little bit about what this session is actually going to look like, so you have a bit of an idea. Now, I wanted to mention first up that you are more than welcome to be taking notes if you like to absorb information that way. But these slides will be available to download, so you can have them as a resource to peruse later as well. So don't feel like you have to write down every nitty-gritty piece of information that you see or hear in the presentation today. There are some slides with quite a bit of text on them, and that's just because we wanted these slides to be available as a really useful resource many months in the future when you are studying for different assessments. So make sure you make use of that, download them onto your computer for later. All right, so we're going to start off with a little bit of an introduction, get you guys getting into the English space, getting you situated with me, who's going to be talking to you for the next 2 hours. We're going to be warming you up, getting your English brains moving. Then I'm going to chat through a little bit about where you guys have come from, and then where you're actually going over the next 12 months into English 3 and 4. Then we're going to chat a little bit about the basics of English, English 101, how to tackle each of the different assessment types that you're going to be up against this year, and then we're going to wrap up at the end with a few study tips. Now, throughout the session, there are going to be little stages where I get you guys to be enjoying or getting stuck into an activity. That's going to allow you a little bit of a break from just hearing information at you. I want to hopefully be getting your English brains ready and working to prepare you for the year ahead. Now, I know that you guys have been enjoying your holidays, and I wanted to thank you for taking some time out of your holidays to come to this session. And part of transitioning out of those holidays back into school is just getting our brains working slowly back into the academic space. So hopefully a few of our activities today will be doing that for you. Now, as I mentioned before, it's only fair that I introduce myself so you guys have a bit of a better idea of who you're learning from today. So hello, again, my name is Maddie. I graduated from Brisbane Girls Grammar School in 2020, which means it's more than 3 years ago since I graduated, which is a little bit scary, but that's okay. And I graduated with an ATAR of 97.65. Some of my absolute favourite subjects in school were English, literature and modern history, with a particular love for English. I just adored it ever since I was very young, and that love of English and communicating and talking and writing has continued into my tertiary studies as well. So I'm currently studying a double degree in communications and arts at the University of Queensland here in Brisbane, and within my arts degree I'm majoring in international relations and peace and conflict studies. I'm hoping to take those skills into the public service after I graduate. I've been tutoring and lecturing high school students for the past 3 years, and it's become something that I am quite passionate about. And just as a little bit of an insight into me, a little bit more if you want to break me down into my sort of base elements, my core elements. I really love terrible movies. I love reviewing terrible movies. It's one of my favorite pastimes. But I can't compromise on the quality of my bagels. They have to be the very best. And then in terms of those two photos there on the screen, something else that I really enjoy and love doing is traveling. There on the left, that's me and some of my friends outside the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. And then me there in the green jumper with a little keychain on my zipper was in Switzerland after I went paragliding, which was a pretty amazing experience. So traveling is also something that I love, and hopefully we'll get to do a bit more in the future. All right, that's me. That's who is going to be lecturing you today. But I want to return back to the world of English now and get those brains moving as I promised. We're going to take about 5 minutes, and I want you guys to write down on a piece of paper, on a Word document, on the Notes app, on your phone, about everything that scares you about senior English. What is it that intimidates you? What do you think is going to be a challenge in the year ahead? It could be the external exam, which is sort of looming on the horizon for you guys for the first time. Maybe it's having to read Shakespeare. I know that is always a challenge, even for people who enjoy English. But also, English is a compulsory subject in Queensland. So for some of you, it might just be having to take the subject in the first place. Maybe you're just not comfortable in the world of English. So I want you to write those down. It can be really small, minor things. It could be big things that you think are a little bit overwhelming or intimidating. But as the 5 minutes continue, if you feel like you have sort of run out of things that you're worried about, then also feel free to be writing down some things you're excited about, or perhaps some goals that you would like to be achieving in English this year. It could be certain grades that you'd like to get, or assessments you'd like to improve on, or more participation you'd like to be involved in class. I'm going to set for ourselves a little bit of a timer just so we keep on track and keep the session moving. But this is important. It's really important to be setting goals. It's really important to be identifying areas in which we might be struggling, because that helps us identify how we are going to address those challenges as well. So there's our 5-minute timer. And once we have about a minute to go, I'll let you know, and we'll head into the rest of the session. Okay, about a minute to go. So if you've done writing down all of your concerns, start writing down some goals you maybe have for English, some things that you're looking forward to. We'll get back into the heart of our session. All right. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the main reasons we like to start with this as a warm-up exercise is because it allows you guys to be able to identify what it is you're actually nervous about. Some people might think that they are just not prepared for English, or they don't like English, or it's a subject they struggle with, and they just start the year hoping that that's going to figure itself out. It's really important that you specify what it is exactly that concerns you, because it's only then that you can identify the tools you need to help yourself, to be able to overcome those challenges or to seek out the assistance that you might need. So now that you have those ideas, perhaps you might be able to turn them into questions for the live Q&A chat below, or some questions you might be able to take to your teachers or your peers also. All right, we're going to start off today with a little look at where you've come from, exactly what the last however many years has created in terms of English preparation for you. Now, this final stretch into senior English can be pretty intimidating, and a lot of students I've worked with in the past come to me with the concern that they feel like they're not as prepared as they should be, or perhaps that they feel like their peers or friends around them are far more prepared than they are, and that's a concern for them. Now, because English is a compulsory subject in Queensland, you guys actually have far more preparation for this subject than you might have for other senior subjects that you enjoy more or feel more confident in. Because of this compulsory subject, you've actually completed prep to year 10 worth of English classes, so that's 10, 11 years. An entire practice year of assessments, that is, all of the assignments that you completed in year 11 will be the same assessment types that you complete in year 12. You've read dozens of books, analysed hundreds of poems, given countless speeches, written hundreds of stories, and read, analysed, and written literally millions of words. Now, all of those little skills, all of those grammar lessons, all of the times you've done spelling tests and vocabulary quizzes, all of the times your teachers have sat you down with a book and made you analyse different parts from it, all of those have been pushing you towards this final stretch, this last year of English. All of those times you've practiced those most basic skills have been about preparing you for this year. So when you're feeling that feeling of not feeling prepared or feeling stressed or overwhelmed, remember that you actually have a lot of work behind you that is going to make this year easy or easier or simpler for you. Now, this might not help all the time, but it is definitely something to be keeping in mind as you're studying. Now, I'm sure many of you are thinking, that's great, Maddie, that's really wonderful. It's a bit of a romantic notion, but it's well meant. But you don't actually care about where you've come from. You're more interested in where you're going, what this year is going to look like. And we are going to have a little look at the basic roadmap of senior English, but I wanted to take a moment to talk really briefly about your mindset and how important mental health is as a priority in your senior year of school, not just for English. Your senior year, year 12, it's stressful, it's tiring, it's just plain hard, and there's really no point in trying to sugarcoat that. In fact, it's not entirely possible to sugarcoat that fact. And so it is really important that you guys be thinking about how to prioritize mental health and keeping your brain in a good place throughout the year. Now, the science, the psychology says that good, healthy mental health, a healthy brain, will actually reflect itself in your academics, in the numbers you get in assessments, in the grades you receive for your exams. So as you're planning out your year, as you're thinking about your study schedule, about how you're thinking about how much time you'd like to devote to school, make sure you're also thinking about how you're going to devote time and energy into looking after your mental health and your brain. It's really, really important. All right. Now let's look at the numbers, the roadmaps for 3 and 4. Across the next 12 months, you're going to be engaging in 4 different assessments. Your first, IA1, is the essay for the public audience. Your second, your persuasive oral. Your third, your creative response to a written text. And finally, you have your EA, which is your external assessment, your analytical essay. Now, something nice about English, which differs from science and maths-based subjects, is that the weighting across all 4 of these pieces of assessment is equal. So it's 25% of your final grade is linked to each of those pieces of assessment. Now, that lineup is what is in your syllabus, but your school might not be doing them in that particular order. Obviously, all of you will be embarking on your external exam in November of this year, but for the rest of them, your school can give those to you in any order that they like. So you're not necessarily stuck to that set of, to that order rather, throughout the year. So that is where you're going this year. Now, when it comes to English, because it is unlike maths and sciences that have black and white, right or wrong answers, it can be a little bit hard to figure out how you might approach studying for English, since there is no set textbook that's going to give you the answers to all of the questions you are asked. So I wanted to give you guys a few key resources you can use to study English throughout the year that's going to help you direct your study in a really productive manner. The first is one I mentioned earlier, which is ATAR Notes Plus, and yes, it is a very shameless plug, but I don't feel bad about doing it because the resources really are that good. In year 11, far before I ever worked for this company, I used a text guide for A Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which is a novella I was studying in literature. And it was so incredibly helpful in allowing me to direct my study. It had annotated example essays, it had practice questions, it had quote banks, it had character and theme analysis, it had a really synthesized plot that was so helpful in my understanding of a rather complex and deep text. So having resources like that can be invaluable. If you're a visual learner, if you like to see connections in a text set out really clearly in front of you, or you would like to be planning different types of assessments in a visual way, then I want to encourage you to perhaps have a look into some mind maps. And you can find plenty of free websites online that allow you to make them. Of course, you can draw them by hand as well. The QCEE syllabus for Senior English is free to view online, so if you haven't ever looked at that before, then I really encourage you to do so. It allows you to get a really good idea of the standards they have set in terms of the English different types of assessments. They have example assessments, high-marked assessments from the past, as well as practice exams as you're preparing for your external as well, so definitely check that out. The most recent syllabus is the 2019 syllabus. Now, that might feel a little bit old, but it's the current one that we are using. So if you're searching around for something more recent, it's the 2019 one that you're looking for. Throughout the term, as you are engaging in class discussions around English, I really encourage you guys to be creating self-directed notes. That includes notes on things you're analyzing in class, conversations you're having with your peers and your teachers. It just allows you to have all of that information in one place as you're preparing for your assessment later in the term. And then finally, if you're looking for a bit more of a passive way to be thinking about study, then Instagram pages, study Instagram pages can be great. Just something that pops up in your feed every now and then. And we at ATAR Notes have one that you can be following as well. That's ATAR Notes AUS. It includes English-based study tips, but also broader study tips for different subjects and study in general as well. So make sure you're engaging in some of those resources for English study. So as I said before, English is not a subject of absolutes. There are no rights and wrongs. You can argue anything as correct and true if you have enough evidence and well-based argument to back yourself up. And so you can't study it in the same way you might be able to study other subjects. This means that my golden rule for studying English is to actively participate in it, to be working on and building up your basic core English skills as much as possible. That means engaging in class, having conversations with your peers, interacting with the text actively, annotating them, highlighting them, getting started reading them as soon as possible. And it also means to be working on English outside of the set content you're learning at school. So that might mean that you're reading more broadly as well. That's one of the best ways to improve your creativity, your vocabulary, your grammar as well. Try and be reading a broad range of genres. It just means that you are understanding how all different kinds of authors use all different kinds of techniques to provoke emotional responses in their readers, because essentially that's what you are being asked to do in each one of your assessments, to provoke some sort of response, whether it's emotional or active, in your reader or audience. So be reading as broadly as you can. That is a great way. If you would like to be working on a bit more of an active skill, then writing is also a great way to be doing it. You can be writing within the specific type of content that you are learning about. So perhaps writing practice paragraphs for your analytical pieces, or writing practice hooks for your persuasive essays. If you're working on a creative task, then there are thousands of creative writing prompts online that you can be engaging with, and that's an excellent way to be working actively on improving your English, improving your creativity as well. So reading and writing are two incredibly easy ways to be improving your overall English capabilities. Now, the more actively you participate, the better you will get at English. It's a proven rule, I promise. All right, we're going to talk first about your persuasive speech. We're going to get into the different types of assessments, and I'm sure that this is what you guys are keen to be getting into. We're going to start off with a little bit of a warm-up activity for your persuasive. Now, if you had to convince someone that geese, the bird geese, were more dangerous than crocodiles, which they absolutely are, how would you convince them? How would you go about convincing them that this is the truth? What specific points might you use to convince them of that? What sort of persuasive approach might you take? How would you specifically convince them that this is the case? I'm going to set for us another little bit of a timer. If you're feeling brave, if you're feeling bold, perhaps you could write some of your responses down in the live Q&A chat below so that your peers can benefit from them. Again, I'm going to set us about 4 minutes this time. We're going to get our brains thinking nice and quickly in the persuasive space, and I'll let you know when you have about a minute left so we can get stuck into the next little bit of our content. Okay, about a minute left. Get your ideas down. If you've got lots of dot points on your page, maybe start thinking about how you would write these into sentence form, how they would actually look within the context of a real persuasive speech that you would be happy to present in front of people. Challenge yourself. Step out of the holiday comfort zone. Get in the English mindset. If you're happy with your ideas, pop them down in the live Q&A chat below. I'm sure your peers would be interested to see what you've come up with. Maybe even more so the moderator. There's the dreaded sound of the timer. Okay, when you're coming up with your ideas, I'm sure a few of you may have written down one or some or all of these three words on the screen here. And I want you to take a moment, if you've never seen these words, if you've never heard of these words before, to have a think about what they might be referring to, perhaps based on some of the images that I have paired them up with. We have logos, pathos, and ethos. And if it's helpful, these words originated in ancient Greek. A bunch of men sat down and basically wanted to think about how we could convince humans to believe something that they didn't already accept as true. Logos, pathos, ethos. What might they be referring to? Now, I'm going to spoil it right away. I'm going to get right into it. Basically, each of these refer to different ways of persuading someone. Now, we're going to start off with ethos, and ethos is all about ethics. It's all about morals. Now, each of us are born with an internal moral compass, which essentially gives us a pretty strong idea from a young age of what is right and what is wrong. We know intrinsically that if we hurt someone, that's the wrong thing to do. We can see it in their response to us. So when you are persuading someone or attempting to persuade someone of something, then you can manipulate their internal moral compass in your favor. Now, if we return to the goose example, and we shall over the next couple of slides, manipulating ethos might look something like this. We cannot ignore the treachery of the goose any longer, and emphasis on the word treachery there. That's a sign of injustice. For too long, the innocent crocodile has been vilified and ridiculed for crimes it has not committed. So we're not just thinking about justice in terms of getting the goose to pay for its actions, we're also thinking of freeing the innocent crocodile. And finally, could you allow for more innocent lives to be lost due to ignorance? So we're pushing and poking and prodding at the idea of justice that exists within people's internal compass and mind. The second one there is pathos, and pathos is all about emotions. Now, humans are naturally emotional creatures. It's why we think baby animals are quite cute. It's why we laugh at little kids falling over, but we don't just rely on our happy emotions, we rely on our sad emotions as well. We get angry over things, we get sad over things, we're scared over things as well, and you can manipulate those strong human emotions when you're attempting to persuade also. Not only would death by goose be excruciatingly painful, fear, the humiliation of such a demise would obliterate one's memory. So this idea of humiliation or embarrassment or shame as well. Sleek white body, honed for speed and agility, powerful yellow legs encrusted with razor-sharp talons, and the beak lined with row upon row of dagger-like teeth. Now, it was quite legitimately frightening to me when I learned that geese do in fact have teeth, so manipulating this idea of fear as well, and we're building up that tension with imagery there. Close your eyes and imagine you're standing in a dark alley, and from around the corner you hear a honk. That's pathos. And finally, we have logos, and logos is all about logic. It's all about statistics and data and getting everything straight and neat in a person's mind. It's the Excel spreadsheet of persuasion. So data is something that we see a lot when we're manipulating logos for persuasion. Geese kill 5 people per financial year, while crocs kill only 1.5. 45% of Australians have been attacked by a goose in their lifetime. And the RSPCA have ranked geese higher on the 2022 deadliest animal list. So we see nice and simple numbers, 5, 1.5. We see a recognizable period of time, like the financial year. Percentages are always great for this, and Australians, we're using data that is relevant to the audience you're talking to, fellow Australians. And then we have respected bodies. We have the RSPCA and perhaps respected lists as well, or respected publications like the deadliest animal list. Now, it's important that your persuasive speech is including all elements of these, not just pathos, not just ethos, not just logos, but examples of all three, because different people in the audience will respond to different techniques. I myself am a pathos person. I respond best to emotion. That's how I am persuaded. But that's not the case with my older brother. He's much more a logos person. He needs data and statistics to make sense of something in his mind. So you need to make sure you're using an even spread of all of the different techniques. All right, let's talk structure of the persuasive so you have an idea of how you might approach planning a piece like this. We start off all good persuasives with a hook, and the hook is essentially a teaser trailer which gives the audience a bit of an idea about what you're going to be talking about, but also piques their interest. It invites suspense in, it gets them curious and wanting to know more. So the hook is really vital to have in a persuasive. If you don't grasp an audience's attention in the first 10 to 20 seconds of a speech, it's unlikely they're going to connect to any of the other information you introduce. So put some time into thinking about how you're going to write your hook well. There are 3 key approaches to writing a good hook. That is, you might start with a powerful quote, definitely from someone who is well respected or known, a particularly strong piece of data that is perhaps quite shocking, or a story or anecdote. Now, all of those different approaches are good and correct in their own right, but I have found that writing a story or an anecdote is excellent because it particularly appeals to the emotional side, the pathos-based side of the audience, and that is a great way in getting people curious or engaged to learn more about your issue. Now, hooks are very short. We don't want them to be long. We want them to just be a little taste of what is to come. So they're generally only 3 to 4 sentences long, definitely no more than that. And the first sentence in particular needs to be hard-hitting. It needs to be interesting and exciting right from the very get-go. Right, then you have your introduction, and this is very simple. It's your personal introduction. You introduce your name, you thank everyone that's there for the opportunity of speaking, and importantly, you have a thesis statement. You introduce your argument, what you are going to be telling your audience about today. And then you're also going to be previewing your argument with some points, and signposting is really important in this. You say, today I will be arguing firstly this, and secondly this. And it's really important also that you are picking a side if the topic you are speaking on clearly has 2 different approaches to it or 2 different camps that argue opposite things. You don't want to be sitting on a fence. You're not persuading anyone of anything if you do so. Instead, be decisive, pick a side. That's what your teachers definitely want to be seeing. Within the meat of your speech, your body points, make sure you have topic sentences or signposting. Firstly, I will be discussing this, this, and this, and then you go into your point. Because a speech is spoken rather than read, it's quite easy for the audience to get lost in all of your information if you're not telling them where you are or what's happening in the speech. They don't have the luxury of having your script in front of them to be able to go back and reread something if they don't understand. So it's really important that you're clear in your language and clear in your sentences so people can keep track of your argument. Within each of your body points, you need to be answering 2 key questions. What is the specific problem you are addressing in this paragraph, and why it is the audience should care about it? How does it actually affect people? And it's really important to use specific examples so people can connect your topic to the world around them and real life situations. As I mentioned earlier, you need to be including all 3 of your persuasive techniques in each of your key points or body paragraphs. So there needs to be examples of ethos, pathos, and logos in all of your body paragraphs to ensure you are covering all of your bases. Also, in each body paragraph, you need to be reiterating your stance from the introduction in the same way that you might link back to your thesis or refer back to your thesis in an analytical essay. It just ensures that the audience knows that you're continuing to build on a singular argument and you are intent on arguing that point throughout your speech. All right. Finally, you have your call to action, which is the light at the end of the tunnel. It's really important that your call to action demonstrates to the audience that while the topic you're arguing about is pressing, it is important, it is dire in some cases, there are tangible things that can be done to help fix the problem or improve the problem or ensure that whatever you're arguing is done. So when you're talking about your call to action, you need to break your audience down into different groups. You might have students, you might have business owners, parents, women in STEM, lovers of Diet Pepsi, and assign each of those groups a specific task that they are capable of achieving. A group of students doesn't have the means to fly down to Canberra and protest outside of Parliament House on an average weekday. They don't have the money, they don't have the resources, they don't have the time. So instead, assign them a task like signing an online petition, calling their local member, or perhaps sharing something on their Instagram story. Things that they are capable of doing, things that they could easily do, things that they might be passionate about doing as well. Also, you want to be reiterating your stance, saying that this is something that must be done, my point has been proven. And you need to have a strong closing line because you want to be holding your audience's attention and their respect right to the very last moment. That's how you know that your point will get across strong and your teacher will remember your argument when they're marking your work. All right. Now, persuasive speaking, it's a very distinct style. If I was to play you a TED Talk now, you'd be able to identify what style it was, even if I didn't show you the video, if you just heard the audio. So persuasive techniques are the specific tools that we use to appeal to the human brain, to understand what it remembers, what it finds impactful as well. Now, there are many persuasive techniques out there. Today, we're just going to be talking about a few. Imagery or figurative language is the first one. It is really useful when you're trying to provoke an emotional response, a pathos-based response in your audience. Excessive logging has created smoldering, charred, lifeless wastelands, home to nothing more than ash. So it's all about allowing the audience to visualize the problem. If the topic you're talking about is quite abstract, people might not care about it if they don't know how to visualize it properly. So it's your job to be able to take them to that place within their minds. Hyperbole is all about exaggerating a problem to make it seem really dire, to make it seem important that it's solved. Rugby league's players plot in gangs towards each other to thump, maul, and gouge for a few centimeters of turf. Using over-the-top language is going to make a dramatic impact and it allows your ideas and your argument to stay in the minds of your audience. Rhetorical questions is great because it allows you to provoke in your audiences exactly how they might answer those questions if they had the opportunity to answer them. How much longer will it take for us to see the truth? How many more people have to get hurt? So it challenges audience to think about the topic you're talking about and how they might respond to it also. Repetition, so repeating your arguments, images, evidence, allows you to really stick something in the audience's mind. It allows you to reiterate messages that they might be able to then take away from your from your persuasive speech. The tragedy is this tragic notion, beyond the obvious, the side effects invoke such a deep sense of tragedy. So including this word tragedy or some variant of the word continuously throughout the speech allows the audience to get a real idea of the deep sense of sadness that is associated with the topic or something like it. Triples, this is a bit more of a basic one, but using words in groups of 3 for emphasis and phonetic appeal, it allows something to stick in the minds of audiences. It's a good memorization technique. Hunting is evil, cruel, and outdated. Do it well, do it fast, do it now. All right, a few really quick presentation techniques, because I know for many of you, the idea of actually standing up in front of a group of people is the scariest part about this task. So first up, gesture, so important. you need to be using your hands. So there's no reason to not prepare some really easy gestures you can be using throughout your speech. You don't have to kind of be coming up with them on the spot. Now, as you probably can tell, I naturally talk with my hands, but not everyone is like that. So you could count things off on your hands, firstly, secondly, thirdly, talk about here and there, put emphasis on something when you're talking about things, higher, lower, etc., etc. So be practicing your gestures, perhaps come up with a few that you might use at different points in the speech for emphasis. One of the best things you can do to prepare is to speak in front of a practice audience, people you trust, people you're comfortable. That could be your parents, your friends, your peers, your teachers, perhaps not your teachers, they might not be able to listen to your final piece. Your tutors, perhaps even a pet, if you're a little bit nervous to talk in front of someone who can give you feedback. It is important that you set boundaries around your feedback. You might say, I don't want any feedback, I just want someone to have as an audience. Or you might say, can you help me with my topic sentences or my gestures or something like that. Peer marking is great. Talk with people that are in the same boat as you, that are completing the same task as you. If reading your entire speech can be a little bit intimidating, you can just choose a section to read out in front of them. They will know how to give good feedback because they'll be familiar with the task and they'll know what your teachers are looking for as well. Passive listening is another great way you can prepare. So reading your speech or recording your speech and then being able to listen back to it will help you with the memorization and familiarizing yourself with the speech if you don't want to be saying it out loud again and again and again and again. You got to save your voice. On that note, it's really important to know it. Your teachers can tell the difference between someone who is reading the script out for the first time in front of everyone versus someone who knows it upside down, inside out. It lowers the chance of nervously fidgeting, of losing your place, of not knowing what's coming next. And also it's important to recognize your habits you have. I've seen students who stand and sway for the entire time or pick at their uniform or something like that. If you can identify your habits, you can address them. Tone. It's so important you're not talking in a monotone the whole time because it's not interesting or engaging and no one will actually be able to follow your argument or know what is important or know what is worth remembering. You need to be varying your tone throughout your speech to be able to emphasize what is important. You also need to match your tone depending on what different emotions you might be provoking, when things are sad, when they're happy, when they're joyful, when they're angry, and so on. Pause. Pause is so important because it allows you to emphasize what is important in a speech and what you want people to remember. Good. And finally, practice in front of a mirror. It allows you to keep track of all of those different elements I've mentioned. What are your facial expressions doing? What does your posture look like? Are you gesturing enough? Are you able to make eye contact with people? It allows you to ramp it up, more emotion, or scale it back depending on where you're at. You can practice different styles to find something better if you're knowing what you're looking like. The same goes for if you might record something. All right, a few things to remember right before you present. Take a deep breath. It's a few minutes, 9 at the absolute maximum, more like 7, and it's going to be over before you know it. Fake it till you make it. Just pretend you're someone who does this for their job. You're Obama, you're Oprah, you've done this a million times. It's too easy. People don't care as much as you think they do. They are more concerned with doing their own speech or what grade they're going to get on this task. They're also in the exact same boat as you. They know the pressures. They understand how it feels to stand up there in front of everyone. If you mess up during your speech, don't apologize. Take a moment to collect yourself and keep going. And have a few people in the room that you're comfortable to look at, make solid eye contact with without laughing. So it might not be your closest friends. You might be persuaded to giggle if you look at them too much. Find some people you're comfortable looking at. And if you can, make eye contact with your teacher. All right. We're going to head into essay for the public audience now, and we're going to get another bit of a warm-up. Now, this will just be a shorter one. I want you guys to be thinking nice and quickly and on your feet for this one. We'll take about 2 minutes to do so. Okay. So every piece of media that we consume in the world today has some sort of underlying message, something that they want the audience to come to understand. So it could be the front page story of the New York Times to the TikTok that you just scrolled past. All of those have something that they want the audience to understand. So I want you to consider your favorite show, your favorite movie, your favorite book, your favorite piece of media, or perhaps the last piece of media that you consumed. And I want you to be able to identify what is its underlying message. What does it want you to think or feel? 2 minutes begins now. Jot down what that underlying message is. What's the moral of that story? What emotion does it want to provoke within you? All right, about 30 seconds left. Keep jotting it down. If you've got some dot points, then perhaps try and turn it into sentence form, what that underlying message is. Okay. So, what is the underlying message of that most recent piece of media or your favorite piece of media? Now, if you've written it out in sentence form, know that that can act as your thesis in this particular task. So, something to consider when you're approaching this task. So, the essay for the public audience, sometimes known as the journalism task or the article task, is probably the most unfamiliar task you're going to be encountering this year, even if you've done it last year or the year before as well. It's the most sort of bizarre, if I'm honest. It takes elements from all other types of assessments and combines them together. It has persuasive elements, it has creative elements, it has analytical elements in there as well. It includes memes, media elements, captions, puns, analysis, a text that you might not love or are too familiar with, movie analysis. It combines them all together in a bit of a monster task, a 1,500 word task. So it can definitely be a little bit intimidating to approach. So if we just simplify it here for a moment, let's just break it down to its most basic elements, its structure. It's going to look a little something like this. So you have your introduction section, which includes, like a persuasive essay, a bit of a hook. So it's just introducing the key topic or theme you're going to be talking about within the essay or the article, and you're linking it to a current event that's happening in the world around us. Then you go ahead and introduce the text you're going to be analyzing side by side. Then you'll have your thesis statement, the argument you're going to be building on and proving throughout the course of the article. And then you're going to be previewing your points. Within each body paragraph, you might have 2 or 3. You'll have your topic sentence, your analysis, the unpacking of one or both of the texts, and then your exposition, which is linking your findings or the key themes that you talk about in that paragraph to a broader 21st century issue. And then within your conclusion, you're recapping all of your points and having a broad final concluding statement about the key themes that you have talked about throughout your piece. Now, When it comes to the essay for the public audience, the most common mistake that I see in students that I've worked with is writing too formally, not matching or finding the correct tone that you're asked to achieve within this piece. So my biggest tip for this is to approach the writing style of this piece as if you're having a conversation with a very cool teacher. They're familiar with the text, they understand aesthetic features and structural devices, film analysis, all of those things. They're very familiar with them. You can make puns, you can quote popular culture, use contractions, incomplete sentences, all of those sorts of things. You are at ease talking to this person. Now, it's not as informal as it would be if you're talking to your friends at lunchtime. This is still someone you look up to, still someone you respect, but you are making this piece approachable. Essentially, the tone of this piece is trying to simulate what it might be like to write an article for a random member of the public, someone who's not interested in reading really heavy, really academic, really formal writing like an analytical essay. An article that they might click on, they see on Facebook or something like that. So an example of this tone might be, while we might describe our Western culture today as enlightened and progressive, are we really better than the history that has always chained women to convention? Now, in an analytical piece, in an academic or formal piece of writing, we would never use the collective we would never use a rhetorical question, we would never use quotation marks to emphasize a particular word. Those are just techniques you wouldn't see in a traditional analytical piece, but they are completely at home within this piece. Now, a few basic tips as you're approaching this task. Definitely, we want to keep this nice and broad because your schools and your teachers are going to approach them a little bit differently, but I found generally these tips fit for most students. So approach analysis as you usually would. The purpose of this piece is still to argue a specific thesis, a specific point, throughout your piece. So there's no need to come up with a whole new formula for analyzing. You're still looking for literary techniques, film devices, certain elements of poetry or plays that provide deeper meaning, and you go from there, you explain from there. Now, when you first start writing, you might have to get used to this new tone. It might be something that you're not altogether comfortable with. So if you give yourself enough time to draft and redraft, then you can write for starters in a more academic tone. And then as you're editing, you can casualize it a little bit more, find a more casual, more conversational tone as you go. Analytical needs to be consistent throughout. So make sure that you're endeavoring to continue to argue your thesis throughout your whole piece. Really, really important. Now, the idea of putting media content and memes or something similar in an essay that your teacher is going to read can definitely be a little bit more intimidating or a little bit more undesirable than perhaps some other types of assessments. But it's a really easy way to make your essay appear more approachable and more like it's been written for a general average person in the public. So if you do so, if you think carefully about what different media elements you might include in your piece, including formatting and pull quotes and font choices and all of those sorts of things, it can be an easy way to make your writing appear more approachable. So you don't have to worry as much about really nailing that a bit ambiguous tone, really. So it doesn't just have to be memes. You can find artwork, you can find screenshots if you're analyzing a film. You can use book covers, even your own Photoshop creation. I really want to encourage you guys to be creative, think outside the box, and have some fun with it, because it can make doing an otherwise perhaps banal type of assessment a little bit more interesting. Now, at the end of each of your paragraphs, at the end of each of your points, you need to have what I call exposition, which is essentially linking the theme you're talking about in your paragraph to a broader 21st century issue. Now, it's important that your connection is based on the key theme of your essay, not the really specific point you're making within your paragraph. If you're discussing racism, talk about some broad ideas or events or figures in the public eye that are linked to that. If you're talking about gender, the same deal. You can always link your essay to specific individuals as well. So in my year 12 example of this task, I talked about Taylor Swift. I also talked about Malala. So you can talk about public figures as well. If the public figure is alive today or their stories occurred in the last 5 to 10 years, you're generally good to go. But I know for a fact that some teachers and schools would like you to keep it even more recent, even more relevant than that. So definitely be keeping an eye on those specific requirements from your teacher, be reading your task sheets really carefully, and just be aware of those different details because you don't want to be marked down for something like that. So you might have to be writing about something that's occurred in the last 6 months or something like that. All right. Something that you might be a little bit more unfamiliar with is analyzing movies. You might be more familiar with analyzing a written text rather than a visual one. We don't have all the time to go into the world of film analysis. There is so much richness in there. But there are actually so many incredible free resources on YouTube that you can talk about film techniques within. And the key phrase I'm going to leave you with, which you can use to look up some really excellent resources, is mise en scène. So it's a French term and it literally means staging. And it really refers to everything that you see on screen: lighting, props, costume, acting choices. I said props already, but I'll say it again because props are a part of it. Framing, all of those different elements are included within mise en scène, and it's a really easy, accessible introduction to film analysis. So go ahead, have a little bit of explore of that on YouTube. It will definitely be a great resource to show you some specific examples from different films as well, and how they're used to produce certain emotional responses in audience members. So have some fun with that. Now, we've reached the end of our second topic and we've done about an hour of our session so far. I hope you guys are doing well. It's definitely a bit of a marathon. I want to take an opportunity to have a little bit of a longer break. We're going to take about a 7-minute break here to get us ready to get into the next big section of our session today. So you can use this little bit of a break time for two different approaches. Either you could be asking some bigger or perhaps more complicated questions down in the Q&A below, or if you would like to stay warmed up, perhaps have a bit more of a fun, laid-back activity, then have a think back to that underlying message you came up with from earlier. And now is your chance to take it to the next level and be thinking about how you might incorporate it in the specific tone of a public audience essay. So make a meme, create a meme that captures an element of that underlying message. So a very classic one over there on the right, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, do not blow this for us. Incredible, iconic scene from early Brooklyn Nine-Nine days. So have a little bit of fun with that. You can create as many as you like. There are plenty of really easy, accessible, free meme generating websites online, even on your phone as well. But you can also take this opportunity to be asking questions. So I'll go ahead and start our 7-minute timer. And then once there's a minute to go, I'll bring you guys back, get you ready, and we'll head into the second section of our session today. Okay, so about a minute left to go. Get yourself ready and prepared for the next little section we have today. We're going to be writing the high of our little break there into another warm-up response for our creative writing piece. Now, this is going to be about introducing you to the creative writing prompts that I discussed a little bit earlier. Now, these are great activities to be participating in if you are if you're interested in working on your creative writing skills outside of the set texts that you have been prescribed at school, or the set writing activities that you're doing in class. So there are literally thousands to be found online. They're really easy. Just type into Google creative writing prompts and you will see all kinds there available for you to get involved in. This one that I have on the screen is one of my very favorites. So it's imagine you are a piece of art hanging on a gallery wall. What do you see from your perspective up there on the wall? Who is in the gallery? What are their reactions to you in particular? Now, the challenge here is to try and give the audience, whoever is reading the piece, a sense of what type of art you are, what it is you depict, using only the reactions of the gallery visitors. So how are they responding? What are they saying to the people they are with? What are their facial expressions? What are their body postures? Are they confused? Are they intrigued? Do they have some sort of really visceral emotional response to it? So it's definitely an interesting task. I'm going to give you guys about 4 minutes. It's a challenge definitely to be writing in a shorter span of time. So go ahead and have a go. Generally, you might want to spend a little bit of a longer time. It allows you to solidify your ideas and be getting down sentences that you're a little bit happier with. But getting the creative juices flowing and perhaps even just coming up with some broad ideas is an excellent start to this task. So 4-minute timer, have a go. If you're not too confident writing in sentence form, that's fine. Just get some dot point ideas down, and perhaps in the future you might return to them to get out a little bit of a story, a longer story. All right, about a minute to go. If you haven't written down anything in sentence form yet, perhaps try and get maybe 1 or 2 down in the last minute. Don't try and restrict yourself to writing something that is really of good or high quality. That's not what this task is about. It's about getting your creative ideas out. Okay, the more you practice doing these creative prompts, the better you will get, not only at writing, not only at vocab and grammar and spelling and all of those good things, but also at coming up with ideas, coming up with creative writing ideas as well. All right, so this particular task within the syllabus is referred to as a creative response to a written text. So it's all about turning a base text, some sort of key theme or key concept from that, into your own original piece of writing. So it's not just as simple as sitting down and coming up with any broad original writing idea. We need to be really targeted about the way that you do that. So, how do you do that? How do you approach that well? Well, first of all, you and the author of the base text need to be well acquainted. This task in particular is all about provoking some sort of emotional response in your reader. You want them to think or feel something by the end of your text. So the first step in being able to do this is to understand how the author of the base text did that with their own audience, which is you. You've read that text. How did you respond to it? What emotion was provoked in you by the end? And what in particular did the author use in order to achieve that? Rather, excuse me. Is it characters? Is it aesthetic features? Is it relationships? What are the specific things that they have used to provoke that response? And how might you be able, pardon me, to use those in your own piece of writing as well? Now, key concepts. You need to be taking one particular key concept from that base text and using it as a really central mechanism in your own original piece of writing. So it could be a key theme, a main character or their personality, a central setting, the cultural background of the piece, something like that. All of those things play a huge role in how an audience member reacts to a text, so be really mindful when you're choosing that. Your teachers or your school might be particular about what that is. They might choose it for you yourself, or you might have a little bit more freedom. Either way, you need to be thinking intentionally about how you're going to use it. I suggest, if you are given the free rein to choose your own, to pick one that provokes an effect clearly. So be mindful about how you do that. Now, just with any other English task, it's really important that you pick a concept or idea that interests you, something that you yourself would like to read. It's a lot harder to write something in particular that is creative if you feel no real inspiration towards the topic, if it's not something that grips you. So if you don't want your key concept, if you want your key concept to be interesting to you, then be really specific about how you're choosing it. If you don't like smog, if you don't like fancy talk, if you don't like stiff upper lip, don't set your story in the 18th century. It's just not going to fit your tastes. All right, a brief journey into the world of mind maps. Now, we talked about mind maps all the way earlier in the session when I was talking about some resources that you could be using as you study for English. And mind maps in creative pieces are a great way to be planning your ideas, to be getting them all on the page and be finding some clear connections between them as you think of how your story is going to piece together. This mind map is one that I created myself all the way back in a million years ago in 2019 for a task that I was doing, adapting Little Women into my own original piece. So as you can see, there are a few elements that are familiar from the base text. We have the character Jo, we have the character Laurie, and you can see how I have taken and expanded those characters out thinking about how I might change and adapt them into a new setting. I also have key themes or key elements of the base text on the other side, and again, just branching them out into their own ideas. Now, I've got this idea of best friends between Joe and Laurie that kind of connects them there. And all of these ideas are connected together. Now, I find that when I have something set out visually in front of me, coming up with more ideas or ways of connecting the story together in a clever way is much easier, rather than trying to hold all of that information in my head and try and piece it together in that way. Instead, having it out in front of you is a really excellent tool. So even if you don't consider yourself to be a visual learner, when you're planning out a creative task, I encourage you to try this out. I think you might be surprised by how beneficial it can be for you. All right. Now, it's quite easy to get caught up in abstract themes and concepts and pretty colors when you're writing creatively. But at the end of the day, it is the characters, the central characters, that actually carry a story. If an audience doesn't connect to the main character, if they don't feel like they can relate to them, then they're not actually going to be interested in the key message that you're trying to share. And that is a big problem in this task. So I want to spend some time now talking about good characters and how to write good characters in your stories. So good characters, at their very core, at their most essential, are believable. Human beings, the ones that we are and the ones that we interact with every day, are not just one thing. They don't like one thing. They don't dislike one thing. They feel a whole spectrum of emotions and are complicated in their pasts. And we're going to discuss in more detail how you might write them this way, this sort of complex background, when you don't have all of the words in the world to create characters of great depth. This means, particularly in the context of a short story, means that they might appear simple, but they gain complexity as the story goes on. You don't have to introduce them as this really complex, deep character right at the beginning. They can become that over time. The character, their personality comes through not only in the way that they talk, but the way that they act as well. And they aren't bogged down by physical description. You don't have a million words to write a really fleshed out character, so you can't eat up a whole bunch of your words talking about the specific hue of their eyes or the way that their hair looks in certain lighting. You just don't have the time for that. So, to build your very own good characters, there are 3 simple questions that you need to go ahead and answer. Number 1, what do they want more than anything in the entire world? This acts as the motivation of the story. This pushes the story forward. So, give your main character something that they want desperately. Make it personal for them. Number 2, what are they willing to do to get what they want? This enters the tension, the stakes of the story. How far are they willing to go to get what it is they want? And then number 3, this is your plot. This is how the story comes together. How do they plan on getting that thing? What are the actionable steps they're going to take? To make this make a bit more sense, to set it in real context, we're going to talk about a specific example, and we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite emo, depressed, Danish prince, which is Hamlet from Shakespeare's play Hamlet. Now, if we ask our first question, motives, you can tell a lot about a person based on what it is that they want more than anything else in the world. Perhaps a person wants world peace. Perhaps they just want a sensational Vegemite sandwich. Those are 2 very different things, and it gives you a pretty basic idea, a pretty solid idea of the kind of person that they are. In the case of Hamlet, what he wants more than anything is to get revenge for the death of his father and restore order to the kingdom of Denmark. He feels like he has a duty to the kingdom that he is a part of, to the royal family that he is a part of, and to his father as well. So those are the motives that push him forward throughout the story. Next, we talk about willingness. What are they willing to do? So if you want world peace, you might be content just with posting about it on your Instagram story. But if you really want a Vegemite sandwich, you might be willing to murder for it. So we thought we knew those 2 people earlier, but once we talk about willingness, we get an entirely different picture. We begin to understand their depth. And those people that we thought we knew based on their motives actually become someone quite different. So willingness is a really important part of the completion and the creation of a character. So Hamlet is willing to kill people and himself to ensure justice is restored, and he repeatedly reminds the audience of this. So we get a deeper understanding of who he is. This really sense of justice and duty pushing him forward. And then finally, we have plans and actions. Sometimes motives and willingness isn't enough. Ultimately, actions are what speak the loudest about who a character is. Hamlet is crippled by self-doubt, fear and procrastination throughout the entire play, and does a horrible job of restoring order and finding revenge for his father. So we have this idea of this young man that is all about justice, that's all about restoring order, that's all about working hard for his family and his kingdom. But then we see in his plans and actions that he isn't as strong as he originally appears to be, and has all of these internal issues that make him more of a tragic hero than a sort of golden hero for the story. So you can see how you can create real depth and real intricacy to a character just by answering those questions. Now, a lot of students come to me and they say, I don't know how to make my story interesting. I don't know how to make my story feel fresh and unique and new. Now, it's really important to know that your story is not going to be the most original piece of work in the world. You just don't have the time to develop something of that caliber. But if you'd like your story to feel a little bit different from a classical piece, then you can be considering narrative structure. So changing up the way that the story is written. So the most basic form of narrative structure, and the one you're probably most familiar with, is linear or chronological, which means that the events occur in the order that they happened. The opposite to that, or the alternative to that, is a non-linear or fractured story in which time is disjointed. So there are flashbacks and flash forwards all throughout, and things don't occur in the sequence that they happened. Then we have circular stories, where the story ends where it begins. This could be physical, so the character returns to the exact same spot where they began the story, or it could be more abstract, so similar concepts or ideas that are talked about at the beginning are brought up again or brought to completion by the end of the story. We have parallel stories where multiple storylines are occurring at the same time, or frames in which a story occurs within a story. So the most famous example of a frame story is from Hamlet, which we talked about earlier, in which Prince Hamlet creates or throws a play, performs a play within the play Hamlet. So it's sort of Inception vibes. There are two plays happening at the same time. Now, parallel stories and frame stories can be a little bit difficult to achieve within a short story context. You don't have loads of words to execute them. So if you're thinking you'd like to do that, I encourage you to bring that idea to your teacher as early as possible so they can help you bring that to fruition. All right. This is the most basic structure of a short story, and this is a great way to be planning your short story if you're not quite sure where to begin. I like to write out my plan using this exact shape. So I write out the words in this shape, and then I fill in the details of what each of those sections are going to look like around that word. So we start off with our exposition. I'm going to be talking about exposition a little bit more in a moment. Then we introduce our conflict really early in the story, which leads to our rising tension, up to the emotional climax of the story, which is the emotional high point, where the audience doesn't know in which direction the story is going to go. Then we have our falling tension and our resolution. Now you'll note that I haven't written Disneyland, happily ever after, fairy tale, beautiful, birds chirping, happy ending, everyone's great and wonderful and loves each other very much. You don't have to write a happy ending to your story, but you do have to write a resolution where things feel like they have concluded. Cliffhangers are old, they're not cool anymore, they've been overdone. If you feel like you have a really unique, interesting way to write a cliffhanger well, again, take it to your teacher, because I have found that teachers generally don't love them because they're a little bit cliche. So instead, find a way to resolve the story. It doesn't have to be a happy ending, but things do need to feel like they are completed, particularly in the sense that your audience needs to understand what your key underlying message is for them. Just like the author of the base text has a key message they like to get across, you need to have one as well. That is a really important element of senior writing, particularly in your creative piece. You need to have provoked some sort of response in your reader by the end. All right, let's talk about exposition, because it's the first thing that many of you are writing in your story. So stories that start with long descriptions, not interesting. It's not allowing the audience to get excited about the story. It's not getting them engaged, and they take up way too much time. So you've probably been told to start in the middle of the action or to start with a bang, but it can be a little bit confusing to understand exactly what that means and what's the point of actually doing that. So, what is the point of doing that? What do expositions actually do? So, they get the audience curious. In the start of The Secret History, it goes a little something like this. The snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. So it starts off, pretty chill. Snow in the mountains, melting, all right? It's becoming spring. We're finishing up the winter months. Someone's dead. Gravity of our situation. What's the situation? Who's Bunny? How did they die? Is Bunny an actual rabbit or is it a person? There's so many questions. It's so interesting. It's so intriguing. The audience immediately wants to know more. Your exposition could also introduce key themes or ideas. So this is a particularly long sentence. This is actually one sentence from A Tale of Two Cities, but it talks about lots of different themes or ideas that are talked about in the book. So wisdom, foolishness, incredulity, light, darkness, despair, this idea of having everything and nothing at the same time. So again, we're introducing key themes that are going to be repeated throughout the story. It could also be an attention grabber like this one from Anna Karenina. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Or your exposition might be all about setting the events of the story in motion. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had locked the hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the pop holes. So this is from George Orwell's Animal Farm. So immediately there's some tension in there. There's something that's gone wrong and that's going to set events in motion that wouldn't have happened if Mr. Jones hadn't made that mistake. And then finally, your exposition can work to orient readers with the narrator of the story or the main character of the story. So from To Kill a Mockingbird, it starts with, when he was nearly 13, my brother Jem got his arm badly broken at the elbow. So we were introduced to this narrator, Jem's sibling, obviously, and Jem himself. And then from The Catcher in the Rye, it says, if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. So we get a real sense of the idea of the voice of the main character, the voice of the narrator. It sets the tone of the story. So those are all different things that your exposition can do. Now, you don't have to try and do all of them at the same time. I encourage you to choose one of them and focus on that, but just note all of the different things that the exposition can help you achieve. All right, we're going to chat analytical essay. Now, I'm sure this is the piece of the session that you are probably most interested in knowing about because it is followed by that pesky marker EA1. It's an external assessment one. So perhaps go ahead and write some of your questions for that down in your live Q&A chat. We want to be getting those nice and flowing throughout this section of the session. As always, we have a little warm-up task. This is going to be a nice short one, nice 2-minute one. I want you to spend some time writing down as many aesthetic features as you possibly can. 2 minutes, go. Get them down nice and quick. If you're feeling brave, pop them in the live Q&A chat. See if you can get some aesthetic features in the chat that someone hasn't already written in there. Think of some abstract ones, some niche ones. 30 seconds left. Rapid fire them in the chat. How many can you get down? If you would like, you can note down some of those examples that your peers have put in the chat for your own study, for your own use later in the year. 10 seconds. Last couple of ones down. Okay. So a key element of a good analytical essay, particularly the analysis section of a good analytical essay, is naming the explicit aesthetic features the author has used. So having a really solid list of those aesthetic features, and even better, examples of those aesthetic features in use, is such a useful study tool as you're preparing for these exams. All right, so we've been on a bit of a marathon today, guys. We have been really taking our time going through all of the different assessments you're going to be approached with this year. And we finally made it to the assignment, which is your external. So this could be the task where you hold a lot of your anxiety. So we're going to be breaking it down, taking it step by step to ensure you guys are feeling prepped and ready. First of all, I wanted to go through some really important information that was released by the QCEE. So in 2019, before the ATAR system kicked in Queensland, the QCEE conducted a series of trial exams to get a good idea of how students responded within external conditions, and they conducted a bunch of English exams. All of those exams were marked, and these were the 3 most important findings from those English exams. Number 1, students with a clear and consistent thesis always did the best. This is so important. This is the most important thing that I think I can tell you today in this session. If you want to write a good analytical essay, if you'd like to get a good mark in your external exam, you have to have a clear thesis that is argued consistently throughout your piece. Your thesis needs to answer the question or the prompt directly, and it needs to be built upon using all of your evidence. So all the evidence you choose, all of the analysis you do, all of the audience positioning you talk about needs to be working towards the goal of proving your thesis. Second of all, students need to demonstrate a deep understanding of the whole text. Your analytical essay isn't just talking about one plot point, one character, one chapter. It's talking about all of it. So you need to prove to your marker that you understand the text in its entirety. And number 3, students need to be constantly referring to audience positioning, drawing on cultural attitudes, values, and beliefs. So throughout your time in senior in year 11 and perhaps in your lead up to year 12, you'll have heard those words, cultural attitudes, values, and beliefs, a lot, but it is particularly important in this task. So every time you talk about how an audience member is responding to the text, you need to be considering how their cultural attitudes, values, and beliefs provoke them to respond. So if you're talking about traditional audiences, the audiences that the text was originally written for, you need to be thinking about how the society around them would shape them to respond. So for many of the texts you guys are interacting with in senior, they were written for audiences that lived decades or perhaps even centuries before us today. So you need to be considering a little bit of history and how that might shape an audience's emotional response. Okay, I wanted to start off in our analytical essay before we get into too many specifics about some basic mistakes that a lot of students make when it comes to analytical essays. Now, most students don't get let down based on their ideas. They don't get marked down on the ideas they talk about in their essays, but rather in a lack of synthesis. So they tie themselves up with knots about talking about too many ideas, about not having enough cohesive devices in there to be linking everything together, or be writing really long, convoluted, complicated sentences. So if you're referring back to your thesis consistently throughout the piece, it's going to prove to the marker that you are arguing your point, you're building on your point throughout, and that's a really first easy step to having a nice, synthesized, and cohesive piece. Second of all is assuming. So a lot of students assume that everyone has made the same logical connections or jumps that they have, and it means that they sort of fail to state the obvious. You are the smartest person in the room. You know more about the text than anyone else, and you should never assume that people have made the same connections as you do. So you need to really logically step out your thought process and your analysis process in the writing of your body paragraphs of your piece, or otherwise your marker might not understand an assumption that you have made, and they're not going to understand your overall point you're making in your analysis. Now, it's just true that exam conditions bring out the worst in our spelling and grammar. So be thinking really intentionally as you're preparing about how you're going to try and avoid those basic mistakes. If you know you don't do well with commas, how can you be practicing writing commas or using commas in different types of sentences? If the text has lots of complicated character names, practice writing them so you're spelling them correctly in your final piece. And definitely, if you can, try and leave enough time at the end of the exam to go back and really carefully be marking your work. This includes perhaps taking a pen and running it along each individual line of the piece. That's the level of detail we want to be going into, because there's nothing more frustrating than getting marked down over a really minor detail or a consistent error in your spelling or grammar that could be avoided if you just edited carefully at the end. Now, there are a few things you can be doing to be preparing yourself well for the external exam in the lead up to it. And the first is annotations. So annotating your text when you're reading it through is really important to giving you the best opportunity for success. So markers can really tell the difference between a student who has read a text and understood a text versus one that's just looked at an online summary of it. And I have marked enough essays in my time or read enough analytical essays in my time to know the difference as well. So as the QCE findings from 2019 mentioned, your markers are looking for a really deep, solid understanding of a text. And this can really only be achieved if you're reading the text in detail as early as possible. Now, I know that reading a book or a play or a novella all the way through might not be all of your idea of a good time. It can take up a lot of brain space. It can be tedious and long. I completely understand that. So I encourage you to be breaking down that process, that chore, into smaller chunks. So be finding boring parts of your day that you can fill with 10, 15, 20 minutes of reading. It might be your commute to and from school. It could be waiting for appointments. It could be waiting at the bus stop, all of those sorts of things. So your external piece is not going to be marked by a teacher who knows your intricacies, who knows the in and out of your thought processes like your teacher. So you want to give yourself the best chance of a success, and knowing the text as well as possible is definitely going to do that. So be writing notes in by hand, be using sticky tabs to identify connections, different themes, different character developments throughout. Using a little key can be really helpful, just little symbols to identify things that are important. So exclamation marks, question marks, arrows, hashtags, all of those sorts of things can just be helpful when you're studying for your exam. You can flick back through, note a little annotation you've made, and that can help as you're writing practice paragraphs and pulling together analysis. So one of the most stressful parts of preparing for English is this idea of memorizing your evidence. So you don't get a quote page when you go into your external exam. You'll have to have all of your evidence memorized. So I encourage you to be developing a quote book as early in the term as possible. Just be noting down important quotes that are linked to key themes, key characters, key aesthetic features, key intentions in the authors, and perhaps key relationships as well. So those kind of themes or ideas are what your basic English exam questions are based on. So having quotes that relate to each of those different things is a really good start to compiling a solid evidence list. You don't want to try and be compiling this list in the couple of weeks before the exam. It just takes too much time and too much brain space. So having them all compiled as early as possible will allow the memorization process to be a lot faster and a lot smoother as well. Another thing that you should be practicing as much as possible is practicing writing a good thesis. As I mentioned in the QCEE findings, a consistent, clear thesis is the most important element of a good essay. So if you don't feel confident in writing them, it's something that you should be addressing as soon as possible. So practice using practice questions. You can find them perhaps on the practice practice papers, past exam papers, on the QCEE website, or your teacher might compile a list of them for you, or you could even write your own. Having a list of those, picking a random one, and practice coming up with a really solid thesis in exam conditions without your notes or any technology around you. It's definitely a challenge, but will help you get in the headspace of being in the exam room and will get your brain thinking and moving in the way it needs to be when you're doing your final exam. All right. These are the key elements of a good, solid essay. You start off with your thesis. So it's your position or your argument, and it acts as the answer to the given question or prompt on the exam. Then you have your evidence. Now, your evidence doesn't just have to be in the form of key quotes. It could also be specific structural devices within the text, or perhaps key aesthetic features as well. Then you have your analysis. This is the thinking that unpacks the piece, that digs beneath the surface and aids in proving your thesis. And then you have your audience positioning. So it's how all the other elements prompt the audience to think, feel, and react. Now, it's important to note that each of these elements build on what you've just discussed before. So they're not their own separate islands, they're not their own separate information, they all need to be linked together. And the way we link them together is by using this flow or this formula within your body paragraphs. So within the meat of your essay, your body paragraphs, each of the elements from this slide are plugged into this specific little formula. So you have, first of all, your evidence. So that is your what. And your evidence needs to be contextualized within the context of the plot of the story. So you're not using act numbers or scene numbers or chapters or page numbers or anything like that. You need to contextualize your evidence within the plot. So it could be prior to Hamlet's father's ghost appearing on the battlements, the prince laments, etc. So you're orienting whoever's reading your work within the plot rather than using abstract numbers that don't really mean much. So then you include your evidence. Then, so what? What does this evidence mean? This is your analysis. You're unpacking, you're digging below the surface, you're identifying key aesthetic features and structural devices within your evidence, and you're unpacking what they mean. And then, so how? How does this analysis position audiences to feel, to think, feel, or react based on their specific cultural attitudes, values, and beliefs? So now, how does this link back to the thesis that I have introduced in the introduction? This formula is used for every new piece of evidence that you introduce in your paragraph. So it could be used 2 or 3 times in each paragraph. All right, that brings us to the end of our analytical essay section, our external exam section. If you have some more questions, make sure you are writing them down in the Q&A below. We're going to have about 2 minutes to really finalize those questions, because I know they are the most important for you guys. Be writing them down below. And then we're going to go into some general tips for grade 12, what this year is going to look like for you guys. Okay. I want to start off with our tips for grade 12 by chatting really briefly about some tips for the exam room. Some really basic tips about preparing for exams. First of all, on the day of the exam, eat breakfast. It is so important that you have some kind of fuel in your body so that your brain can be working, can be using its critical thinking skills, can be using its problem solving skills. So important. In the 30 minutes before the exam begins, you have done everything you can to prepare. Anything that you can do within 30 minutes is not going to drastically alter the final grade you get. So use that time to breathe, to center yourself, to get prepared, to check you have all of the tools that you need, and to look forward to it being over, because it will almost be done. In the exam room itself, make sure you take the time to carefully fill out all of the information. It's so important you get all of that done. The last thing that you want is for your exam to not be marked because you haven't written your name down in the right spot, or you haven't clearly marked which exam question you were responding to. For your English exam, you'll be given 2 questions. You have to pick one that you will be responding to and mark it on the exam sheet. So make sure that you have done that and double check that at the end of the exam as well. Use all of your planning time. So for your English exam, you should be given 15 minutes of planning time. It's so important to use every last minute of that. So use it to come up with your finished, polished thesis that you're going to use, because remember, that's the most important element of a good essay. If you have time, you also want to come up with all of your topic sentences for each of your points and the evidence that you're going to use. Now, it's okay to use a little bit of your actual writing time to come up with a full plan, because it just prevents you with writer's block. If you have all of your information down on the page next to you, then you can refer to it and you know exactly what it is that you need to be writing next. So that could include your topic sentences, all your evidence, your audience positioning, and the broad statement that you might have at the end of the essay, which talks about the wider themes of the play or the novel or the novella or whatever that you're analyzing. So having that with you is going to help prevent writer's block. As you're writing, make sure you have a title. Again, super important. It's not going to drastically change your mark, but it's so good to have it there on the page. Make sure that you are just writing. You don't have to write in the order that the essay or exam is going to be read in. You can write whatever section you would like. If at any point in the essay writing process you find yourself choked up, you don't know what to write next, you're feeling confused, you're not sure, refer back to your plan, use the formula we talked about earlier, what, so how, so now. But if you're really not, it's really not making sense, you're really not sure what you're going to write next, that's okay. Take a moment, breathe, put your pencil down, close your eyes, take a minute. A minute that you're using to center yourself is not a minute wasted, because if you try and press through the panic and keep writing, you're not going to write a quality of work that you're happy with. So instead, take a moment to center yourself and then you can continue. You are also totally okay to leave a gap and to come back to it later. If you do fill in a gap and you find that it's not enough room and you need to write somewhere else, really clearly mark that on the exam page where the marker can find the rest of that section of the essay that you've written elsewhere. So write a little asterisk and say completed paragraph on page whatever. All of your exam pages should be numbered, so that should be really easy to find. So those are the really key tips for the exam. Of course, it's going to be a little bit of a different experience for everyone, but just take the time to breathe. You've got this. You've done all of the preparation necessary for this to go well. It's going to be fine. The last thing I'll say about it is really try and take the time to leave enough time at the end to clearly and carefully edit your work. I know the compulsion is to just hand the essay in and run out of that room and never thinking about it again, but you're going to regret it if you get marked down for really nitty-gritty details. So go through, check all of your spelling and grammar, check you have a title, check all of the information is filled in correctly, and then you can hand it in and you are free of it. All right, A few broader goals in terms of study to help year 12 be as simple and accessible and as calm as possible. So, number one, you need to have 3 achievable goals in your day. Expecting yourself to get 3 billion things done in 24 hours is unrealistic, and it's going to send your mood right down. You're not going to feel like you're progressing. You're not going to feel like you're achieving the things that you want to achieve. So instead, you want to set yourself 3 really specific goals that you can easily achieve within the day. It's going to aid you in feeling good about yourself because you're ticking things off the list, and it's also going to get you progressing. The more you check things off your list, the better you get at achieving your goals. It becomes possible to add a few more goals in the day. So 3 might become 4, might become 5. I want you guys to have one day in your week that is completely free of study, that you don't think about school. You do things that you enjoy. So you hang out with people that you love, you do an activity that you like, all of those sorts of things. Separating yourself from school and from study and the stress of that for a day is so beneficial for balance and your mental health. So we talked about setting up a good mental health priority at the start of the session, and it is definitely true, and I definitely want to take the time to reiterate it now. You're going to burn yourself out if you're not taking some time away from study. And that really leads into my next point, which is to recognize your emotional boundaries. Understand and recognize the signs that you are working too hard. It might be that you're fatigued during the day, you become really irritable really easily, you're not sleeping well, you lose your appetite, you don't enjoy things that you used to enjoy. All of those are signs that you're going to burn out, and it's really important that you take steps immediately to try and avoid that happening. If you just let yourself burn out again and again, it becomes really likely that something like that will occur right before your exams, or even worse, during your external exams at the end of the year. And we just want to prevent that from happening to the highest degree. So make sure you take the time to recognize those boundaries and then be able to take the steps to fixing that in your schedule. All right, take care of your physical health. So healthy brains live in healthy bodies. So it's also important to prioritize looking after your physical health as well as your mental health. So that might be finding some exercise that you enjoy doing. It doesn't have to be crazy. You don't have to be going to the gym for 2 hours every day. It could just be a walk around the block. It could be putting on a stretching video or a yoga video on YouTube and working out. It could be running up and down some stairs when you're feeling like you need to burn some excess energy. It might be finding some really healthy, nutritious recipes that you love, or starting the day with a good breakfast. All of those sorts of habits will just, again, help you in the long run. You might not notice the changes instantly, but your body will absolutely thank you for it, not just at school, but in any further education you choose to pursue and in the workforce as well. Your performance will just fly through the roof. Take the time to set yourself goals and celebrate completing them. So go out and eat with your friends after you complete your exams, watch some Netflix after you finish a chapter review, go for a run after you nail those set of flashcards. Get yourself into a positive feedback loop. So the more you get to do things you enjoy after completing goals, it will train your brain that working hard gets you things that you like, and you want that because that will aid in getting your progression flowing. And finally, break it down. So some really big tasks like the essay for the public audience can seem really intimidating at first because there's just so many elements to them. There's so much to do, and that leads to procrastination. If things are just really complicated, you don't want to start them in the first place. So instead, go ahead and break them down into more palatable chunks. So that might be, I'm just going to write my introduction today, then I'm going to put my English away and work on something else or do something better that I enjoy, step away from study for the day. And then the next day, I'm going to work on body paragraph 1. Do that, walk away, do something else. It actually will allow you to finish the task quicker. It will allow you to complete the task quicker, and will ensure that things are getting done to a better quality because you're not rushing things. It can also look like this for all of your other subjects as well. You could just be completing 3 complex unfamiliar questions for maths. You could be doing 1 practice English plan for your study that day, 2 sets of your biology flashcards, 3 games of vocabulary recall for your language study. So breaking down big tasks into smaller chunks will help you sort of avoid procrastination. So this brings us to the end of our session today. So for the next 5 to 10 minutes, the moderator for today's live Q&A chat will remain down there to answer any last questions that you might have. So definitely make use of that. If you have been a little bit shy and haven't been asking any questions throughout the session today, now is the opportunity. Not only will asking your question help you, but it also might help someone else that was hoping to ask the same question or didn't realize that they wanted to ask the question but found the answer super useful. So go ahead and ask those questions now and over the next 5 minutes or so. I wanted to thank you again so much for joining me. It has been such a pleasure to walk you guys through this head start for QCE English 3 and 4. English in senior year is such a joy. There are so many tasks in this that are really interesting and opportunities to challenge yourself and push yourself outside your comfort zone and the realms of what you thought possible for yourself. So definitely have fun with it. Make sure you're setting yourself goals, but also being kind to yourself as you work to achieve those goals. I'm really rooting for you all. I hope you really can make the most of this year. You take as many opportunities as you can. You enjoy all of these lasts that come along with year 12 as well. For some of you, I hope to see you soon over at ATAR Notes. Remember that there are so many incredible resources there to help you guys with your studies. But if I don't see you, I wanted to wish you all the very best of luck for the year ahead. It is such a great year. It is so much fun. It is such a cool opportunity to push yourself in the academic sphere as well. So enjoy every last minute of it. And I wanted, as a final reminder, to know that you are not and will never be defined by that ATAR number you get at the end of the year. It is just one single moment in your life, and one you will be able to move on from. So thank you again, everyone, for today. It has been so fun to enjoy this all with you, and I wish you all the very best of luck and hope to see you at ATAR Notes very, very soon. Thank you, guys.